So I thought I'd start with a few assumptions, whether implicit or explicit or in the forms of theories, that have to do with eating behavior and the issue of interactions. If we look at the economics, the standard theory in economics, we see that foods are just ordinary consumer goods. Actually, according to Paul Samuelson, the ultimate example for what he calls a private good is the loaf of bread. I think that's a very mistaken statement, but nevertheless. So they are just consumer goods, and I think Paul started his talk by saying that, the perspective from the mouth and the fact that ingesting, putting something into our body is a form of consumption that is far from common. I mean, it has a very special status in the sense that we certainly will pay attention to what we let enter our bodies and become part of us to a large extent. So foods are consumer goods, says the theory, and consumers are just individuals supposedly with preferences that are always implicitly considered stable. There's no dynamic perspective on the preferences. And they're under constraints, economic time constraints, and consumers make choices under those constraints. Of course, they're supposed to be rational in the probabilistic sense of the word. And what is striking when you look at this literature and this theory is that there's a complete vacuum between individuals that are atomized as if in some spatial void, and there's nothing but individuals and government, and the only issue is what intervention there is from the government. Now, if you look at some of the theories in psychology, there's, to a large extent, many of these theories, at least reasoned action and a few of the Eisen and Fishbein and theories, they're always based on notions of attitudes, intentions, beliefs turned into action and behavior. And there is always there is always a picture of action and behavior being triggered by intentions and deliberation and choice. So intentionality is of the essence. And I asked once Professor Eisen whether everything we did, all behaviors, were always intentional, and he admitted that some of the routine things that we do on a daily basis may, of course, be more automatic. That's not the term he used. Like taking the bus to go to work, for instance. No deliberation there, he conceded. But if we look at food, there's a lot about food that does not necessitate deliberation at all points. There may have been an illusion associated with the fact then that research, particularly in the social sciences, has, to a large extent, emphasized extraordinary eating occasions as opposed to ordinary daily occasions. Actually, this is something that had been noticed by Audrey Richards, the British anthropologist in the 30s, who was probably the first or one of the first to write on food and eating from a truly interdisciplinary nutritional and social perspective at the same time. Now, if we look at nutrition and the assumptions in nutrition, which incidentally are mainly implicit, what do we see? We see that nutrition obviously looks at eating behavior in individual organisms. And it looks at individual organisms eating calories and nutrients. And the problem nutrition has with individual organisms eating calories and nutrients is that nutritionists generally believe or find that these individual organisms make reasonable choices in terms of the benefits to their health. Hence, a need supposedly for behavior modification, which has been a huge part of the literature on eating behavior, how to modify behavior. And sometimes quite often actually, attempts at modifying behavior before having an exact knowledge of what exactly the benefits would be. And the organisms, the individuals, have been or are being targeted individually through mostly nutrition education, public health campaigns, public policies. And I'm sorry to say that if we look at the country that has probably made the most efforts along that line for the last 100, or should I say 200 years, beginning in the early 19th century, it's obviously the United States. And by current obesity rates, I wouldn't call the result a success. And I might go as far as suggesting that the supposed remedy might very well have been part of the problem by individualizing and making decisions about food and making people feel responsible and confused about their eating. But that's judgmental, I suppose. If we look at determinants for eating behavior, generally speaking, people have been looking at physiology and regulation, mostly at motivation. But as Jean-Pierre pointed out, environmental influences have been overlooked, or the people that were working on the behavior tried to get them out of the way. I mean, the influence of context and sensory, light, sound, music, sensory interactions, and of course, above all, sensory interactions between people, social interactions. So eating in humans is essentially social. It shouldn't be looked at as an individual activity in the first place, because if we look at the evolution of humans and primates and humans, we should see that cooperation is absolutely fundamental. Cooperation through hunting or through providing foods in general. And once you've secured, say, some game, particularly big game, then you have to devise a way of distributing the food and sharing the food among people. And in other words, cooperation, altruistic behavior, social interactions in food are at the basis of social organization in hunting-gathering groups. So we are a highly social species. We eat in groups. And eating behavior has always been predominantly examined in individual behavior. And then when we try to look at what happens socially, in what kind of interactions occur, of course, we have to look at commensality, as Jean-Pierre has shown already this morning. And we need to have precise picture of the context, of the role of the context. We can find very easily that, as you showed some examples, configuration of space, furniture, the various rituals, the type of people being commensal to the meal, of course the food served, the order and syntax of the meal. All this is extremely complex and need to be understood and examined. So some of the functions of commensality that have been identified, and it's not a limited list. Of course, it's the allocation of food to individuals in the group. It's the inclusion or exclusion of the members present or absent in the occasion. Of course, there's the hierarchy, the pecking order that is crystallized or symbolized or materialized through the meal. The seating, as you showed, or the order of serving, who gets served first. Let me remind you that the word prince comes from princeps in Latin, and princeps, primus capere, means he who gets served first at the sacrificial banquet, which is the central institution in one of the central institutions in Greek and Roman societies, ancient societies. Also, social time is structured according to meals. We say before lunch, before dinner, after dinner. Everything is organized according to that. Identity formation, the social fabric of personal interactions. There's the point of general function of restoring life, which is very obvious after funerals when people, as it were, in many, if not all cultures, get some eating occasion and gradually return to interactions, talking, exchanging, and coming back to life as it has been described by some anthropologists in very different societies. And of course, there is a function which is protecting commensals about external potential aggressions, but also regulating competition between commensals, because come to think of it, there is basic potential competition. And a large part of socialization of children, for instance, in most cultures, is about how to behave at the table, not getting helped, not helping oneself first when this is against the hierarchical rules or rules of preeminence, and not eating too fast or not eating too much, more than one's share, etc., and so on, regulating eating behavior within the intragroup set of interactions. If you look at previous research on commensality or social interactions about eating behavior, you find that it's been mostly done in artificial environments, laboratory situation, or, as we have seen a little bit about the Institut Paul Bocu's program, semi-artificial or artificial situations having, previous various loads of food before and looking at what the effects are of small intakes taken over time in various settings, as opposed to larger meals, that sort of things. Again, no account has been taken in most cases of context, of local patterns and rules, of what constitutes a meal in the local culture, and it's been calorie and nutrient oriented. The other thing that is available is approaches using diaries, like De Castro's work, and their self-reports, and they're based, which I find really surprising in a way, or confusing. They're based on an assumption that behavior in group meals should be compared to behavior in lone eating situations. But who eats alone? Generally speaking, eating alone is often considered something not very acceptable in a number of cultures. I have this example of an anecdote from a colleague teaching sociology with an Algerian background. And one day his father tells him, it's a revelation, that there has been another woman in his life before his mother. And he says, what? What happened? Why didn't you marry her? And the answer was that he was caught in a very embarrassing situation by the father of the bride-to-be. He was caught, he was seen eating alone, standing on the central square of the village. And the father decided that there was no way he would give his daughter to a guy behaving like that. So eating alone is frowned upon in many, many cultures. I mean, my student Chelsea Yunt studied lunches, midday meals in Dakar. And many men like to sort of sneak out and get food from some of the local so-called gargotes who have very bad reputations. They are run by single women, and they are behind curtains in obscure places, and there are all kinds of rumors and accusations and suspicions over people, males essentially, who skip common meals that took all morning to be prepared by the women. And the suspicion can range from guilty activities of some kind of or other to probably witchcraft or poisoning or stealing food, or that sort of thing. So eating alone does not go without some questions in many cultures before Western European or mostly North American cultures. If we look at commensal situations, we can see that obviously there seems to be little left to individual choices and decisions. I mean, I have no proof for what I'm saying, but based on this very picture, it seems roles and factors for eating are well defined, and there seems to be little choice left to commensals in this situation, as opposed, of course, to what happens in our current situations, where, for instance, you see a child standing near the table, which would be unacceptable in a few decades back in European context, but has apparently become quite acceptable. In the same way, the notion of personal preference or choice or dislike or allergy or requirements of any kinds is probably out of order in this particular situation. This is North Africa and Morocco. This is Senegal. There's no table, obviously, but commensality has its rules, and there's no less strict in this context of eating with hands than it is with eating with forks and knives or chopsticks. There are specific rules as to where you have to get your food in the plate, or where in the dish, or how much, at what rhythm, etc. And of course, the setting does a lot for the type of interactions that will occur. This is the setup for a ceremonial kaiseki meal in Japan, and this is a conference at Cornell University. All these situations, of course, are rather different and imply different interactions and different behavior. I remind you that the Knights of the Round Table picked the Round Table precisely for reasons of social nature, in the sense that none should prevail, so they had to use a special chair to mark the spot, the place of the king, because the Round Table doesn't help much in establishing hierarchy, as Jean-Pierre pointed this morning, the oval table, or even the rectangular table, of course, leave no doubt as to which is the preferred spot for sitting the leader of the table. This is a meal that has been described a number of times in European and Western culture. All right, let me illustrate a little bit the social consequences of setups. This is the so-called service à la française, which is not what they call à la française in the hotel and the restaurant business, but what historians have identified as a service à la française in the 17th to 19th century at the Royal Court of Versailles. This is how it worked. All the dishes around here are the guests. They are seated around the table. Each has their plate. And this is one service. Everything is arranged on the table around a central piece. And you have a hierarchy of dishes which are all codified, coded according to elaborate rules. So there are up to 7 services like that during a meal. And people obviously don't eat everything. They can help themselves to whatever is within their range, or they can ask some laquais, valets who are standing behind them to get something from the other side of the table if necessary. But what is clear is that if you like something, you can have it. If you dislike something, nobody will notice that you do not eat it, which of course is important for people's independence. Now, at the end of the 18th century, an innovation occurred in French ways, which was called service à la Russe, because Russian style, because supposedly there was nothing really Russian about it, but supposedly it was first observed at a dinner at the embassy, the Russian embassy in Paris. So anyway, it's an entirely different system. As you can see, each has an entire set of utensils which correspond to the succession of dishes, individual dishes that are going to be served. So each guest is offered the tray by the servant and helps himself or herself to the dish. So it's a very conspicuous situation. So if you do not help yourself, of course, the people of the house will notice. If you take too much, the guests will notice. And it's very difficult to avoid things that you wouldn't like. So there's more social control exerted upon individual behavior than in the previous model, or any model that we would call synchronic, that is, when foods are served at the same time. So this is to illustrate the type of interactions involved. Social psychology has listed, Jean-Pierre mentioned already some of these dimensions. Social psychology in particular has is examining the type of effects, mechanisms involved. So there's something called social facilitation, which makes individuals eating together, apparently eating more than when alone. And there's modeling, imitation, if you like. There's impression management, the impression you give of yourself, you try to control when you eat. And there are cases of scrounging, too. So, in order to illustrate what Jean-Pierre has been describing this morning in terms of the difficulties one has when collecting and analyzing data about commensality and interactions, I thought the best way was to tell you a little bit of what we do. And basically, there are two little programs, one by Valérie Hatt, funded by various grants with the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and the other by a grant by the Nestlé Foundation on more practical interventional study designed at trying to identify and implement good practices in school cafeteria in order, of course, to improve the experience. They're looking at interactions between children with adult staff, and mostly Valérie Hatt is looking at the timing and synchrony of meals. And this is both observational and, in the second time, experimental. And the setting is, quote, natural in school cafeterias. The method is a very crude instrument by current standards. It's a small camera, about the size of a telephone, made by Sony, discontinued recently, and using a 360-degree lens. So about a dozen of these cameras are used and are distributed on the tables. And the first study was done in 11 primary schools, so the number of children in the primary schools involved was 637, and there's more than 400 in the secondary. And the interesting thing is that, contrary to the lab situations that have been used previously, there's a variety, there's a rather representative sample involved, in the sense that all kinds of schools in the Paris area, in all kinds of ethnic and socioeconomic locations and, contexts, have been performed. The ages are 6 to 15, and the data collection involved a large number of meals, the unit analyzed being what we call la tablée, so the tables, over one meal. So what has been done is coding of randomly selected parts of the material because of the huge dimension of the material. The advantage of the 360-degree camera over the laboratory multiple cameras is that, of course, one camera at a time captures the entirety of the situations, the interactions on a table. You don't need to decipher various recordings. On the other hand, there are 10 to 12 cameras used simultaneously, and the sample is, the material is huge. So she's looking, Valérie is looking at Valérie Hatt is looking at, has been looking at 6 dimensions so far. Individual behavior, the sequence and the order of items consumed, the use of utensils, etc., and the social interactions between peers at the table, with peers from other tables, with adults, and with the camera, which is very important because, of course, the primary objection is the presence of the camera. Does it change the behavior? Yes, it does. It certainly does, and it can be studied as such, and it can be actually rather informative in certain respects, particularly differences in individual differences in interacting with the camera, social differences, gender differences in the relationship to the camera, and the social interactions around it. So this is what the image looks like. It's a donut, if you like. Of course, it can be extended or deployed into a sort of tape. I will show you later, but let me show you this particular example, which is very crude and simple, but illustrates the point. This is a German-French school in a rather upscale suburb of Paris, Saint-Germain, near Saint-Germain-le-Pec. And And so it's a French, German, European school where the children are German and French and learn German and French. They're bilingual. It's Germany's national day, so the children are being served a supposedly German meal, and the first course is pretzel, which you see here. And there is this little girl here that you can, I hope you can see here behind the big pretzel, and she makes a very bold statement up front. She says, "Manger ça, c'est un châtiment." To eat this is a punishment. And châtiment is a very sophisticated word for a 7 or 8-year-old. So we are in an upscale context. All right, so she's stated very clearly that she doesn't like the stuff, and it's very likely we expect her not to eat it. What happens next is this. This little girl here, so we have 2 little girls and a boy, plus the one that has made the statement. And this one starts with using the pretzel as a mustache. And she's actually very effectively starts a game, which is both a competitive and imitative game, with the little boy using the pretzel as a horn, a unicorn. Then immediately the other girl replicates with modeling the behavior. Then there's a little escalation, and we are up to 2 horns, which is immediately replicated. A mustache again, a bigger mustache. This is an example, a very simple, very crude example of social interactions leading to a behavior that was not predictable, at least to us, from the beginning. And social interactions do have effects on actual eating behavior. And they can change. I mean, it's been known for a while that peer influence is an extremely important factor in influencing or reversing even preferences. But this was, I think, an illustration of the kind of behaviors and interactions you can capture using video and the 360-degree approach. Let me finish with just emphasizing what basically Jean-Pierre has said it all this morning. And what we need is, of course, at the same time, a more controlled environment. And of course, the advantage of the school cafeteria is that it is controllable to a certain extent. The kids are not exactly entirely free. The events, the unfolding of events is highly predictable. You can intervene on a number of factors, the order of things served, displayed in the self-serve line, on the behavior of the staff, on a number of things. So it's a relatively controlled environment, but it's far from being ideal, of course. On the other hand, the problem of an entirely controlled environment is that you lose the advantage of the real life, of the natural, so to say, situation. So if we are in a position to obtain at the same time maximal context control and something that would be an effectively functional restaurant, something that would be actually operational, a real restaurant and a real laboratory at the same time, this would be, of course, a big progress. So I'm curious to hear what our people more aware of the technical, practical aspect of things will tell us in this respect. Thank you.